Hello and welcome to CGB Games, Cameron here, and today we have another devlog for the game I'm solo making called Groundskeeping, a first-person multiplayer hotel maintenance horror game. The first thing we're doing today is finding a lovely car from the marketplace to fit in my newly made garage. When it comes to assets like this, that will take ages to make, it saves a lot of time simply by getting something that's already been created. That way I have a lot more time to progress the rest of the game. In the end I chose a green car and downscaled the textures so it would perform better in the game. One thing I noticed when testing is the ceiling looks very sparse, so I've decided to add wooden beams that will run along the width to break it up a bit. Texture was a simple wood that was quick to add as well. Now we can move on to something a little bit more complicated, lighting. Firstly, I'll start by modelling the light fixture for the garage. In the end I decided to go for a singular hanging light bulb, as this will be the most rustic room of the house. I then added the texture for the light bulb and the cord that attaches to it. To get this light working, we also need to add a switch that the players can interact with in the scene. I created a simple design with a pressed and unpressed state that would look exactly the same so that it wouldn't take much dev time. And then the texture is just a plastic with a bit of scuff. With the model in the scene and the texture applied, I'll add the same code that was working for the garage shutters and tweak some things so it interacts with the lighting. All that remains now is to add that lovely switch press sound, and then we'll have a working system we can test. As you can see here, it not only works as intended, but it also works over client and server as well. Now that I'm happy with that, we can move on to filling the crawl space we created last time. The hatch part will be simple with a few details added for visual flair. I made sure the 0 point of the asset was in line with the hinges so that it would rotate correctly in engine. The texture was also boring to make, and now we have the asset complete. With it in engine, I now need to create the blueprint so it opens and closes with each user input. I used timelines to animate it and booleans to check whether it was in the state of open or close. Finally, with that done, we can create the UI element that shows up when the player hovers over it. It's important to follow the same art style as the existing ones so everything has visual consistency. Now we can source and edit the opening and closing sounds, and because this will be a rare sound, I opted to not make variations and just stick with one. With the pipeline working for opening and closing a crawl space, we can use what we've learned to get the door working as well. Firstly, we can model the door itself. I made sure to use the door frame I created earlier so that the door would be the correct scale. This model ended up looking a little bit industrial for a family home, so I imagine this will just be a one-use thing for the garage and I'll make something else for the rest of the house. To spice things up, I didn't create the material straight away and decided to get the blueprints working first. It didn't take long as we already had the most of the code and we could copy a lot of it. Now we can finally texture, and I followed the theme of chipped paint over an underlying wood. One thing I noticed in the room was breaks in the brick texture above the wall, so I quickly made some wooden planks that I could use to cover up these imperfections. And as we can see here, everything seems to be working nicely thus far. I also think it's finally time to get rid of this godforsaken pink orb in exchange for the actual leaving truck. I sourced the base model from the same place I got the car earlier and tweaked the proportions in Blender so that it would fit in the garage. I also added a few extras like ramps so the players could reach the exit. With that in engine, we can leave it for now and get this second door created. Like I said, I wasn't too pleased with the first one, so we're creating a different design for this one. This is a lot more homely by design, and it will also have a door handle, which adds a bit more complexity, as I want this door handle to move when the door is opened. Again, the blueprints were easy to make, with the slight addition of a second timeline for the handle. Then we just need to add the texture to round this whole asset off. With both doors in engine now, we need those opening and closing sounds. Unlike the crawl space, the doors will be used a lot, so there will be two variants for open and close. Unfortunately, I messed up my scaling slightly, so now there's a gap above the second door I've made. So I had the ingenious idea to fill this space with a little window, which was promptly given a texture in Substance Painter. So it seems that time again where I want to add another optimization method for the player. This time it's for the reflection qualities of the entire game. A few commands implemented later and it's all working. That means it's time to turn our attention back to the truck with a nice texture to round it off. I made most of the asset predominantly red, as I needed it to stand out in any map. I also added a large amount of grunge, as this is meant to travel the country in all weather conditions. I wasn't fully happy with the ramps I'd made earlier, so I went back and added some extra details to them. Again, these assets also adorned the red metal texture. And finally, the door that enables the player to escape needs to be added to the truck. I wanted this to look like a protective sanctuary, so the door handle takes inspiration from submarine doors. When an engine, I also added a subtle green light to the door so the player could still potentially find it in complete darkness. And then all that was left was to texture the bad boy, giving it the same grungy aesthetic as the rest of the model. Well, that about does it for today's devlog. We got a lot done, and I think this sprint is shaping up nicely. If you like this video and want to keep up to date with the continuation of this game, then consider subscribing so you don't miss any progress. And if you want to see my previous game, it's on Steam now, so you can check that out if you want to see more of my content.